Well, welcome to week 2 of our class on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Last week, in the first presentation, Dr. Lori Brandt-Hale talked about the 10 defining moments that shaped Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life and career. And so it gave us a kind of a Cliff Notes version of who he was and what he did. Obviously, the story involves much more than that, and you're welcome to explore that. There's no shortage of things that are available. There's some good resources out there, books, but also resources online. Have to be careful though, because Bonhoeffer gets appropriated by almost everybody, sometimes on opposite ends of the political spectrum, even. So keep that in mind. If you have any question, you can always touch base with me, and I can tell you, as far as I know at least, what is a good resource and what isn't. Speaking of Cliff Notes version, that's kind of what we're going to be doing again this week in talking about the theological and ethical themes in Bonhoeffer's work. And so there is basically one slide we're going to be looking at. She had a whole series of slides, and kind of each one adds a little bit more to it. And I thought that was confusing, not only potentially for you, but also for me, keeping track of all that. And I'm trying to simplify the presentation as much as possible to give you a taste and a flavor. So the screen that that you should be looking at, it has a circle with the words other or neighbor, community, grace, and responsibility. And those are the 4 pieces to his theology and his ethics that if you can grasp that, then you have at least the beginning of understanding where he was coming from. As Dr. Brandt-Hale mentions, there's continuity in his theological and ethical thought, and so he keeps coming back and around again and again to these 4 basic themes, and those themes are other or neighbor, community, grace, and responsibility. And she says if you walk away from this course with nothing more than these 4 ideas, that you'll have a great framework, she says, of understanding all of Bonhoeffer's works. Beginning in that upper right-hand corner with other or neighbor, in his doctoral dissertation written in 1927 and then later published in 1930, he says what it means to be human comes in an encounter with and an ethical response to other humans. Unlike philosophers who were only interested in others in terms of how that affects the individual, Bonhoeffer emphasized the importance and integrity of the other as other. Put in another way, he saw the value in others, so that the use of this term other is not negative, as in othering someone, but positive and affirming. Well, I wasn't even sure what that meant. I had to look that up myself. That concept of othering that she refers to here is the process of excluding and marginalizing a person because of their race or their ethnicity, their gender identity, sexual orientation, class, or some other demographic identifier. So rather than affirming a person's individuality and innate dignity as a human being, the idea of otherization leads people to make premature judgments about another person's character and personality. Occasionally, and even more insidious, disturbing process of dehumanization can occur. And this happens when a group takes the concept of othering so far that they feel entitled to act unethically, maybe even cruelly, towards an entire group of people on the basis of false or generalized pretenses. And that's clearly what happened in Germany during the reign of the Nazis, where they reduced these other people, to, in some cases, especially in the case of the Jews, being less than human. And then that allowed them, in a sense, to do almost anything to these people. I'm reminded here of the poem written by Martin Niemöller, another German Lutheran pastor who actually worked along with Bonhoeffer in the confessing church, but he came to this in a different experience where he was about I think he was about 14 years older than Bonhoeffer, and he actually had fought in the First World War. He was in the Navy. He became a U-boat captain. He sank a lot of Allied ships. He was predisposed to the Nazi movement, and at first even went along with some of what they were doing. He didn't like when they started kind of encroaching on the church, but he was an anti-Semite by his own admission. Only later did he realize his mistake, and again, with Bonhoeffer and others, they formed kind of the church's resistance, if you will, the confessing church, to the Nazi takeover of the German church. He ended up being imprisoned, nearly executed, but he was imprisoned for about 7 years, something like that. And after the war, he confessed, this idea of otherization, where you reduce people and they don't count and you don't speak up for them. So his famous poem, First They Came, you may have heard it. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So the terrible thing of when you reduce people, especially to the extent of, or the extreme of being less than human, means that you can do anything to them, and they did. Well, then moving from other or neighbor in the upper right-hand corner down to community, here he's talked about in his thinking the interrelation of people and community and God, and he wrote about this concept in his dissertation Sanctorum Communio, in other words, Communion of Saints, and also later in his well-known book Life Together. Grace, then, moving clockwise, is another central theme, and here that was discussed at length in his book Discipleship, that you may know as in the English, The Cost of Discipleship. And here, among many things, he made a distinction between cheap grace and costly grace, as he called it. Bonhoeffer concluded that grace is the unmerited gift of mercy and forgiveness from God, and in that he was like Luther. He also recognized that it's a gift that transforms us, like Luther again, and also St. Augustine, but it calls us to discipleship. He said, cheap grace, though, is the preaching of forgiveness without repentance. It's baptism without the discipline of community. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without the living, incarnate Jesus Christ. Well, in contrast to that, you have costly grace, which he says causes a disciple to leave one's nets, like the disciples, the first disciples, to follow Jesus. Costly grace did not excuse one from works. Instead, it endlessly sharpened the call to discipleship. So grace is not a get out of, prison free card, like in Monopoly or whatever, get out of jail card, that you just play, use it, you have it, you claim it. It doesn't mean anything for your life. He argues, as did Luther as well, and others, that yes, we are forgiven and saved by grace alone, but that then frees us to answer the call to discipleship. And so altogether, this understanding of the other and of community and of grace, coupled together with what was happening in Nazi Germany, coalesced into his theological and ethical thinking as a call to responsibility, the final word there, or responsible action. And for Bonhoeffer, the ethical question is not how can I be good, but rather what is the will of God? In other words, what am I called to do in this time and place and in response to those who are in need in front of me and around me? So these four themes, other, community, grace, and responsibility, have the theological and ethical significance in Bonhoeffer's thoughts, and it persists through all of his work, and they continually build on one another. Well, kind of coming back around again, in Bonhoeffer's dissertation, he had an expanded treatment of the first two themes of other and community. He developed what has been called a theology of sociality, the idea that people come together in social groups and so forth. But for him, there's a new social form, for Bonhoeffer that is, in which love liberates people from dominating and exploited power over others to the freedom of being with and for others. So the other is not somebody who serves my needs or whatever. It's the other is the person I come together with in freedom and to be with them. And so the famous dictum or statement from his dissertation that Christ existing as community uncovers his understanding that the church is both an ongoing revelation of God in the world. Okay, so this is God active in the world, but it's also a concrete community because it involves people coming together, disciples, following that call to discipleship and being working together to be the church. He also introduced the concept of vicarious representative action. In German, and I have to write this down, Stellvertretung, which is basically means to or refers to Christ's vicarious representative action on behalf of humanity, a fallen humanity, which restores community between humans and God, and as well as between humans themselves. So again, the ethical response for Bonhoeffer is to center one's life rather than on just rules and principles, but to be responsible for others. And to be responsible for others is to kind of free us from ourself and our selfishness. So to put it in another way, apparently in his lectures on Genesis 1-3, it's being free means being free for the other. The freedom of a Christian, according to Bonhoeffer, is this offered by the gift of grace is not a blank check, offering Christians the freedom to do whatever they wish. Like I said, the get out of jail free card, but it's the freedom to act on behalf of others, the freedom for others. And then going on in ethics, his uncompleted kind of would have been his, crowning achievement as a theologian, but unfortunately he started work on it, and then he was arrested. He tried to work on it while he was in prison. He, again, never fully completed it. His good friend and biographer, Eberhard Bethge, took what existed that Bonhoeffer had written and tried to put it together, and it was published after the war, but again, it was an incomplete work. But here, Bonhoeffer rejected the idea that ethics can be, as he said, universally valid. In other words, good in all times and in all places, or derived from general principles. He rather had an understanding of responsibility that's tied to concrete reality, and that people are called to respond to another in need. There's that word responsibility. He said Christ was not concerned with whether an action or the description of an action could become a principle of universal law, but whether my action now helps my neighbor. So it's not it's not principles that you live your life by in all times and places, but rather in the present moment, the present struggle, if you will. How can I act responsibly on behalf of others? And so he also talked about ethics as formation. We should conform ourselves to Christ and turn towards, again, what he calls a concrete ethic. We can and should speak not about what the good is or can be or should be for each and every time, but how Christ may take form among us today and here and now. Again, that reminds us of the idea that Christ existing as community. He also wrote in this idea of ethics as formation, the first concern of the church is not with the so-called religious functions of human beings, but with the existence of the world of whole human beings and all their relationships. The church's concern is not religion per se, but the form of Christ and its taking form among a band of people. So again, Christ isn't this principle according to which the whole world should follow, be formed. He doesn't proclaim a system that would be good here today and for all times. He doesn't teach an abstract ethic, Christ that is, that can be carried out irregardless. So in that sense, he was not essentially a teacher, a lawgiver, but a human being, a real human being like us, said Bonhoeffer. And so Christ doesn't want us to be pupils or representatives simply or advocates of particular doctrine, but human beings, real human beings before God. He did not, like an ethicist, love a theory about the good. He loved real people. Christ was not interested, like a philosopher, in what is generally valid, but in that which serves real, concrete human beings. Christ was not concerned with whether a teaching could become a principle of universal law, but whether my action now helps my neighbor to be a human being before God. God, in other words, did not become an idea, a principle, a program, or a universally valid belief or law. What? God became human. And so we are turned away from any abstract ethic and towards a concrete ethic. And so it's no surprise then that in a letter of support to his co-conspirators, written at the turn of the year from 1942 to 1943 while he was imprisoned, he asserted the importance of seeing world events from the view from below, going back to the other neighbor heading there on that slide. It remains, he said, an experience of incomparable value that we have for once learned to see the great events of world history from below. This is the interesting thing, from the perspective of the outcasts, the suspects, the maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed and reviled, in short, from the perspective of the suffering. So often in the world and even in our own lives, it's we see it from our own perspective. We see it from the people who are in power and control, and he's always thinking of not just the other, but the from below, from the suffering of people. And so the last slide, second slide today, reflects what he wrestled with in his book, Letters and Papers from Prison, which again was a collection of all the things that were smuggled into him, letters and things, and that he was able to smuggle out. He wrote to his best friend and theological confidant, Eberhard Bethge, what keeps gnawing at me is the question, what is Christianity, or who is Christ actually for us today? And that was what he wrestled with and struggled with really to the end of his life. And so religion is just not this framework of do's and don'ts and beliefs and everything else, but it is being drawn into the life of Christ. It's being drawn into, because we are set free by God's grace, to be free to live for and to help, to serve, to love others. In real life situations, in tragic situations, in difficult situations. And certainly that's exactly where Bonhoeffer found himself and remained true to that perspective all the way through his life. So, talking about Cliff Notes version, that's exactly what this is. But again, as Dr. Laurie Brandt Hale said, if you understand his focus on the other or the neighbor, not as somebody beneath us, but as somebody who shares in this life and in this world, and that we need to work together with, and also many cases for, also that idea of community, that that the church exists as community, Christ exists as community. Christ continues to be in the world through the body of Christ, through the church. the idea of grace, that we are set free, not free from something bad, not free from punishment or whatever we might imagine, but free for others, and to answer that call to discipleship, and then the responsibility to be there for other people, and that ethics is not what's right and wrong, but how am I called to act in a particular situation in my own life, in the here and now. So it is very much focused on not the grand scheme of things, but on the moment. And so that's going to change, and that's going to change from one time to another. And I think it's one of the reasons why Bonhoeffer is so relevant again today, because we find ourselves, especially those of us here in the United States, with a lot of things being challenged, and a lot of groups and peoples who are being marginalized, much as they were in Bonhoeffer's day. And how do we respond to that? Well, Bonhoeffer gives us a key. Bonhoeffer gives us some clues as how to respond. I heard the quote that history doesn't repeat itself. This is according to Mark Twain, but it rhymes. And it seems as though the events of the current day for us here in the U.S., sadly, rhymes with some of the things that Bonhoeffer faced. And because they do, I think he can speak to us today. And so I hope you have a chance to watch this. We're going to meet together on Sunday, April 6th, to talk about it. Hope you can join us between the services. And then we'll have one more week. I'll record another session on, why Bonhoeffer, why now? Again, maybe talking more, or not maybe, but talking more about this moment in history in which we find ourselves, and how it is that Bonhoeffer can help us navigate these, as many of us see them as troubling times. So I hope you have a great week. I hope you have a chance to watch this. I hope you have a chance to join us on Sunday for a little bit of a conversation and discussion between the services. Until then, as I like to say with my daily devotions, take care. Bye-bye.